Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. Today I'm going to talk about the bane of every crafter's existence, storage. Our storage falls into zillions of categories. At the house, we have, storage that's in the house. And there's a lot of crafty stuff going on here. And you'll notice I've got stuff piled up here, and that's because I'm doing about 40 things at once, which is kind of normal for us. But lately I've been thinking about some new things that I need to make, and I thought I'd share the basic process. A bunch of you know that I run a shop at historical reenactment events. And one of the things I try very hard to do, and generally succeed at, is I do not want to have anything in the actual main part of the shop that screams modern more than I need to. Now, I have cases in which I keep sterling silver that are modern. They're covered with linen and they look nice, but they do have glass tops to them because the reality is if I don't cover the sterling, someone might just decide that it was a great idea to borrow it and take it home without paying for it. And having experienced that many times in the past, I put all my sterling silver into cases and people have to ask to get it out. I know some people don't like that, but the reality is those people who don't like that are not going to be willing to spend extra money to cover the thefts that occur when I don't have it there. But aside from things like that, I try to have everything that's on display in non-obnoxious containers. I use wood when I can, and there are standard jewelry trays and stuff that I use, but I try to have everything kind of low-key. So it'll have sort of that, it's plastic, but it's covered with a black flocking. It's not super screamingly modern. I mean, it is to me, but you can only do so much. I'm not going to sit there and hand make a gazillion display cases. I don't get paid well enough for that. But when I bring in new products, sometimes I need to come up with new ways to display them. And my go-to for that is usually small wooden boxes. Now, I am fortunate enough to be the proud owner of a bunch of wooden boxes like this. Now, these are cigar boxes. And quality cigars actually come to this day in wooden boxes. And a friend of ours on the East Coast gifted me with a whole stack. He said, I can get these for you for cheap or nothing. And I have also bought them. There's actually a gun shop not that far from us that will carry cigar boxes for sale, and they'll range in price depending on how fancy they are and stuff like that. So something that's a plain, let me see here, something that's a plain wooden one, crash, like this one might be $4 or $5, and something that's fancier, either in terms of the fittings or the finish or something else, like this one's a really fancy one. This one's got velvet on the inside and the outside. Unfortunately, it's also foil stamped, but you can see this is quite a nice looking piece. And these can easily be made into display boxes. I have done this before a bunch, and something like this would be, gosh, it's been a couple of years since I bought it anywhere because I've got plenty right now. Probably 10 or 15 bucks, is my guess. You could also go to a crafty sort of place like a Michael's or a Joann's, and they will sell plain boxes, usually unfinished, like this. And you can choose to, they usually have the hardware all on them, nice corners and stuff. They come fancy and plain. This one is a slightly fancier one. I'd like fancier hardware. And it's usually empty. And it's up to you to finish it. You can paint it. You can use some sort of lacquer or stain or whatever to change the color if you want it darker. I usually darken mine simply because it'll get dirty from being touched by hands. But now you have a box, and And that's a good start, but it depends on how many things you want to exhibit. So whether you're trying to store notions for sewing or whether you're trying to do what I'm doing, which is have a display, you may need to have some dividers. And things like this are great El Cheapy thing, probably purchased at a big box store, I'm guessing a Sam's or a Costco, in massive quantities. I know they're available at most of the big box stores, both in singular and in massive. I usually buy in massive because if I'm going to buy something like the plastic shoe boxes or something, I will buy a stack of 12, all nested together nicely and neatly, and with the same matching lids and all that sort of stuff, just easier. You can, if you need some dividers, you can get either the plastic or the wooden, depending on your own aesthetics and what you're going to use them for, trays that are used for cutlery. And I have used those pretty extensively in the past for, not the plastic ones, I would never use that for display, but the wooden ones, you know, they're just nicely divided up with pieces of wood. But you can do that yourself super simply, and I wanted to run through sort of the idea of it. So this is an old cigar box. I still use it in my shop. In fact, I need to reattach the sign. It's trying to fall out of the thing here. But this has got the same essential arrangement as this one does. It has some design on the front. When it's in use, it's open like this, so you don't see the design on the front. And I'll usually lean this against an upright of some sort. So what you see is this. Bronze buttons, $5 each, or $25 for 6. Okay? And I have 4 compartments here that are suitable for bronze buttons in different sizes. I usually have 3 or 4 sizes at any given moment. I have a couple more in the works, so if I get to the point where I need to do more compartments, I will have to change something up. In this case, one of my goals, because I know this from experience, is I do not want a super deep compartment. People are, the unkind word that just came to my mind was spastic, but slightly uncoordinated would be more kind. The reality is a lot of people don't have great manual dexterity, and they have trouble reaching down into something and grabbing little things. These buttons are not big. They're only, well, the biggest ones are, let's see, half an inch across. So, you know, 7, 8 millimeters across. And being able to pick them up without having to go down into a deep well is a handy thing. Now, in this case, I was not 100% convinced that I would be using this setup for the rest of my life, so I didn't even bother to glue it in. I have simply got 2 pieces of wood that slide in here. And when you take it out, you can actually see, yeah, that's actually been, it's simply stained from the dust and stuff, so you can still see where the cross goes. The technique for making this is dead simple. If you have ever purchased mason jars or anything else like that in one of these containers, it's the same idea. You have Ball Jars still sells their jars with separators that are made out of cardboard. And all you have is you have a separator that goes in one side, and these are designed to click together so they're harder to get apart. I'm not going to take my other one apart. Because this is a brand new one, so it's not going to fall apart easily. If I had one of my old ones, it would flop apart really easily. I wonder if I have an old one accessible. Okay, here we go. This is a care container instead. And obviously these are pint jars instead of the little ones. This is slightly older. The older ones didn't have additional tabs on them to make them lock together. All I want to be able to do is pop out one of these dividers as a way to show this. You can make these kind of dividers yourself. Super simple. Basically, all they are is a piece of cardboard that's been cut about half of the way through, and a piece of cardboard that's been cut about halfway the way through. They slide together, and you have a divider. And that's the way these are made. I don't know. I didn't glue these, but they don't come apart. They were press fit. I don't worry about it. I'm not doing jumping jacks with these. They sit in my box like that, and they stay. Now, I had an interesting experience this week that reminded me of an article I had written probably, 8 years ago, probably, for a blog. And the name of that article was called something like, All Rulers Are Not Created Equal. And what I was discussing in that article was the fact that if you start using one ruler, use that ruler for the entirety of a project. Because unless you're using high-end steel engineer's rulers, there may very well be differences between the measurements on it. As long as you're consistent, you're okay. For instance, we're watching currently somebody on YouTube building all sorts of trim and cabinetry and all kinds of things. And he has specific rulers that he uses, and he's very fussy about it. If he were to suddenly switch between rulers, he might find that his measurements were not the same. And that's exactly what happened to me this week. I was working, you'll notice there's some fabric missing here on this side of the table. I was cutting out this strip of fabric. And I have a tape measure. I've had this tape measure forever. It is polyester reinforced. It's from Germany. The spring in the retractable thing probably died 10, 15 years ago. It retracts about 3 or 4 inches and then it quits. But it's very handy. I've never had any problems with it. I normally use the yellow side. And the white side is nice because it has both metric and imperial, so it has both inches and centimeters, and that's cool. Well, I was working out this. All I was doing was cutting a strip of fabric, and the strip of fabric had to be a certain width, and it had to be a certain length. I had squared up the end of the fabric here, and I measured, I'm going to say 55 inches. It was something like that. 55 inches down and marked it with a piece of chalk. Then I went to the center line where it needed to be cut and I measured and I marked it with a piece of chalk. And then I took another ruler and I lined it up and I went, I don't have 2 parallel lines here and 2 parallel lines here. I seem to have something that's fine here, but this end is doing this. What the heck is going on? So I'm like, okay. And I must have measured it. I was late in the evening. I shouldn't do this sort of thing when it's late in the evening. They always say, you know, when you get tired, your brain just kind of, you know. And I realized what I was doing is I was switching back and forth between the sides of the tape measure without thinking about it. So I took a close look at the tape measure and I discovered, despite the fact that I've been using this forever, I normally, like I say, use the one side, the yellow. But I decided when I lined up the tape measure using the end and ran it an inch, it was not exactly the same as when I used the other side. So what I effectively had was slightly different measurements, and it wasn't like, it wouldn't matter if I was only measuring something that was 4 inches long. You might have a millimeter or 2 difference. But over the course of 55 inches, he was getting me off by a ½ inch. And I was like, okay, this is supposed to be right. I don't want to have to retrim this. I don't want to waste any fabric. I don't want to have to cut it extra long. And then I realized what I was doing, and I stuck with one side of the tape measure, and magically, it worked the next time through. So when I am cutting something fussier, and not that fabric can't be fussier, but when I am cutting something slightly less forgiving, like wood or plastic or metal, I want to be sure that my ruler is a good one. And I was looking, before I sat down to do this, for my good metal ruler. And you don't think I can find it, can you? I know where it should be, and it's not there. I know where it usually is, and it's not there. I just thought of someplace else it could be, because it could have fallen down, and it's not there. So I don't know where the heck it went. The problem is a gray steel metal ruler can sometimes vaporize, which is why I normally have it someplace really specific. So I'm not thrilled with that. But I do recommend that you get yourself a steel ruler. If your steel ruler has rounded over edges, it will be super obvious right away. If you're concerned about those rounded over edges, you don't use the edge. For instance, here's not a steel ruler. Here is a paint stirrer that came from ye old Home Depot. And if I were measuring with this, let's check it against a tape measure that I do trust. It's right on. It's right on. The inch is an inch. Okay, great. But you notice I didn't use the end because I know that's where this ruler's off. And I wouldn't use this end because it looked like it was chewed on by a beaver. I mean, it's just a not nice end. This is a paint stirrer. No one ever intended you to do major engineering feats with it. So if I were going to measure with this, and I had already checked it to make sure it worked, I would measure not using that last inch. I would measure starting with a 1 and just always subtract 1 when I was doing the thing. Okay, here I have a 3-inch item, 1, 2, 3. Okay, there it is, trunk, perfect. I have engineer's rulers, which are usually short little guys, about 6 inches long, down in the studio that I use all the time. And this I didn't even realize had a ruler on it till I was looking at it doing something else earlier. This is strictly in metric, but it doesn't matter. This is a fancy engineering type piece. You don't have to have a fancy engineering type piece. I happen to own this. It was on sale, and somebody was doing some clear out at a so I was attending, and I said, hey, perfect right angles, perfect 45-degree angles, all in beautiful stainless steel, made in Germany, carefully marked, highly calibrated, can't go wrong. It was cheap. Weighs a ton too. You could whack somebody on the head with this if you had to. So when I am cutting, no matter what I'm cutting, whether I'm using something fancy or not, I go with a ruler that I can trust. That's rule number 1. What are you going to cut? Okay. What I recommend people do, if they have little or no experience with this sort of thing, is play with cardboard. Get yourself some decent cardboard, not a packet, not a box that has come from Amazon that has had all its corners rounded off and where the cardboard has gone soft on you, but one of them that somehow magically seems to arrive and be pretty much structurally intact. And that does happen. I mean, sometimes a heavy package gets the stuff and speed out of it, and sometimes a light package gets the stuff and speed out of it. But if you get a decent box, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to be not rounded off. And I'm trying to see if I have one that's not rounded off here. And I do. So this one, for instance, is in pretty good shape. So I could conceivably cut, at least from this side, which is in great shape. This side is actually a little wobbly here. I could cut out some strips of cardboard here if I wanted to experiment with making dividers for something. What I have done in the past when I wasn't sure what I wanted, because to me one of the hardest things about storing things for crafts of any kind, sewing, knitting, crocheting, beadworking, you don't even know what it is having the right number of compartments, having the right size compartments, and knowing how many compartments you need. For my jewelry supplies, where I have lots and lots of beads and bits and pieces of bobs and stuff like that, I normally use professionally made plastic containers. And that by far is the easiest thing to do. But those darn things can be wicked expensive. So if you're looking for something that's a little more unusual, like I'm looking for something that's wooden, I'm not going to worry about the fact that if somebody really reads this, they can see that it says reserve Oh, this is in Spanish. Okay. My Spanish is not great. Anyway, but it says this is a reserve. This is a higher quality cigar, so it's got nice things to say about itself on there. And there's 20 of them in here, etc., etc. I don't worry about that because even though it's not anything to do with what I'm selling, it's kind of innocuous. It's just it's attractive in terms of the graphic layout. It's dark printing against a wooden background. And to be honest, when this is open and this is leaning against something, they're looking in here and they're seeing, oh, bronze buttons for $5 each or $25 for 6. Okay? So if I want to practice this, all I do is I get some cardboard and I practice the layout. I figure out, well, do I need a large compartment on one side and several small compartments on the other side, or what? Now, for something like this, I'm creating something myself. Sometimes when people are just trying to figure out what they need, this can also be a handy approach. You don't have to get anything fancy. You can start with something literally like a tray that canning jars came in, and you can make cardboard dividers and just figure it out. I watched, who the heck was it? Adam Savage. I watched Adam Savage on his Adam Savage Tested shows on YouTube. He's a science nerd that I've always enjoyed from Mythbusters, and he's a maker. He's always building something. He has this incredible tool shop that's got every tool that I ever wanted and more, some of which I don't even know what they do. But yeah, he will sometimes figure out what he needs to store, get all that stuff together onto a table, and then lay it out. So how often, you ask yourself, how often do I need this object? Do I need it every time I sit down to do this hobby? Or do I need it once a month or once a year? Okay, even if I need it just once a year, I need to know where it is. I need to keep it clean, safe, undamaged, etc., etc., and all the parts together if it's a multi-part thing.